A very good evening and a warm welcome to all the speakers and the attendees who have joined us today for the Hemato-Oncology Conference 2021, a virtual summit. The theme of today's conference is the current advances in diagnosis and treatment in the field of hematology and blood disorders. I hope we are all excited for the 1.5 hours of scientifically engaging sessions. It is my pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's virtual conference, Dr. SVSS Prasad. Dr. Prasad is a senior consultant medical and pediatric oncologist and hematologist and bone marrow transplant physician practicing at Apollo Hospitals, Jubilee Hills, Hyderabad. He has over 26 years of experience and has special interest in pediatric oncology, hematology, and BMT, and is also the first in India to be qualified in both pediatrics and oncology. I welcome Dr. Prasad to take over the session and moderate today's sessions for us. Warm welcome to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prashant. Good evening, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Today, we are having this Hemato-Oncology Conference 2021, a virtual summit organized by AstraZeneca and Argiopa, an open access publisher. And today's theme would be to discuss about the current advances in diagnosis and treatment in the field of hematology and blood disorders. And the idea is to educate one and all, including the residents and young doctors, about the best practices so as to maximize their interest in hematology and their knowledge retention and skill development in hematology. And we have a galaxy of speakers, 2 sessions wherein there will be lectures, and then a panel discussion on optimal selection of second generation BTKI later on. So we have our first speaker as Dr. B. Pawan Kumar. He would be speaking on the role of acalabrutinib in high-risk CLL. Okay, and Dr. Pawan Kumar is senior consultant medical oncologist in the Basavatarakam Indo-American Cancer Hospital and Research Institute, and he did his MBBS from Bangalore, and he did his MD from Davangere, and DM from the Amrita Institute of Medical Sciences, Kochi, and he is a very commonly seen participant in all our webinars and meetings, a good speaker, and I'm sure we'll enjoy his talk. I will now hand over to Dr. B. Pawan Kumar to speak on the role of acalabrutinib in high-risk CLL.
Thanks, Rosetta. Thanks for your kind words. I will take from here.
Recording.
Hi, everyone. I'll just forward my PowerPoint. Small problem. Yeah. Just a minute. Yeah. I think I'm in. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Pawan. I'm a consultant medical oncologist. I think I'm audible to everyone. I'm a consultant medical oncologist in Basavatarakam, who deals with most of the hematolymphoid malignancies. So I'll be dealing with management of high-risk CLL and special interest in the acalabrutinib. So definition of high-risk CLLs have evolved a lot with the new entities coming to picture. Now with the gene mutations, the two important mutations what we see is P53. So P53 mutation is definitely mutated P53 is unfavorable, and IGH unmutated is again unfavorable. And in the fish, what we usually look into, the unfavorable are deletion 11q and 17p, which actually are correlated, the P53 and 17p. And the trisomy 12 and normal cytogenetics to be neutral, and favorable is deletion 13q. And karyotype, more than 3 unrelated chromosome abnormalities, more than one cycle of karyotype is again high risk. And the importance of high risk evolved with the new trials coming into picture and analyzing the data, where they noticed people with 17p and 11q deletion, the median OS is almost this 11q deletion, median OS is half of what is the regular or a good risk, that is the deletion 13q, and 17p is half of 11q. So that is only 25% of the good risk. So as things evolve, the 17p and 11q remain the unfavorable. And there is a difference between P53 mutation and deletion. Deletion is used 17p deletion technically, and mutation. Sometimes when we see fish and fish is not showing 17p deletion, there can be a 3% chance difference, like there can be a P53 mutation, but there is no deletion. So P53 alteration, any alteration tends to do bad, and people with deletion and mutation tend to bad compared to the single names. That's the usual monomer we are looking at. And people with CLL and having a IGH unmutated wing tend to do poorly compared to people who have IGH mutation status. Taking all this into picture, now CLL, there's a CLL International Prognostic Score where they take into 5 things into account: age, stage, beta-2 microglobulin, IGH, mutation status, and P53. So 11q doesn't find any importance here, but IGH and P53 really makes a sense. And people who are high risk and very high risk actually define the treatment plan. And people high risk still we can treat, except for patient asymptomatic. Asymptomatic patients still doesn't require any treatment. The usual question everybody asks: patient is asymptomatic, upfront CLL, is it worth to do all the mutation panel or fish panel to get CLL? Actually doesn't require, but patients who already have a panel done and we notice that they have high risk mutation, is it really required to treat them? Still the data says not required. Patient asymptomatic need not to get treated, but there are high chance that they may end up getting treated early than people who are not high risk. And very high risk technically needs to be treated. With the new data available, they don't respond very well to cytotoxic or immunochemotherapy, and these people need a targeted therapy or a BTK inhibitor and the newer drugs which are coming into picture. Now, to start, before going to acalabrutinib, what all things have evolved over the period. So this is an alliance trial where they compared the first time using of ibrutinib in a treatment-naive CLL, wherever they required CLL, and initial trial always compared with rituximab, bendamustine. Ibrutinib was also added. There was one of the arm where rituximab and ibrutinib were combined together. So you can see here in the patients with 17p deletion, wherever the ibrutinib was added, both rituximab or without rituximab, they tend to do a lot better than people who didn't get ibrutinib. There's a chemo arm. And 11q deletion, the same picture. Maybe single agent ibrutinib did slightly better, and people who don't have any of the high risk mutations again did better. And with or without rituximab, they had the same thing. So the whole thing is clear is high risk mutations. The PF is definitely better when you're adding ibrutinib, but with no mutations also it's better, but not as conspicuous as the people with a high risk mutation. Even IGH mutation, people who had unmutated, the addition of ibrutinib did better than non-ibrutinib, and ibrutinib rituximab compared to ibrutinib did slightly better. But there was no difference in the mutated IGH, because being a low risk always does the same. Now, The same thing, the next trial was Illuminate, where they combine same using in a treatment naive CLL. There, the combination of ibrutinib obinutuzumab versus chlorambucil ibrutinib. It's very clear. I think anybody can make the difference. There was no addition of 17p deletion patients here, and it's very clear addition of ibrutinib to obinutuzumab did better than chlorambucil. And one thing people have to notice, like whenever obinutuzumab was added, so that previous trial, what we saw, Alliance trial, the combination of ibrutinib, rituximab versus ibrutinib and Arbenda, ibrutinib alone is enough compared. There is no addition of rituximab. That's the period. But obinutuzumab is slightly different from rituximab. The thing is, obinutuzumab is the only drug, is one of the only drugs in CLL where they actually put MRD as importance. Like people who take obinutuzumab, there's a chance of patient ending up to minimal residual disease. But using a TKI, never a patient can achieve a minimal residual disease. And it's always a partial response and they have to take a lifelong treatment. But obinutuzumab and probably venetoclax subsequently and other chemotherapies. So addition of obinutuzumab made a difference. So obinutuzumab ibrutinib combination did a lot better compared to as simple as that. Even patients who had obinutuzumab with chlorambucil, also some patients actually had a minimal residual disease, which I don't want to elaborate in a minute, but that's the thing. And I didn't help. So rituximab, obinutuzumab and ibrutinib arm tend to have slightly more side effects than this: the pneumonia, the fibrillations, the thrombocytopenias, bleeding. Resonate-2. So this was single agent ibrutinib versus chlorambucil, and it's very clear they didn't use 17p deletion arm here, and the only thing high risk mutation is 11q, and it's very clear 11q patients tend to do ibrutinib. And estimated PFS was 79% with deletion 11q alone. Very clear. And same Resonate-2, the PFS in the patients who are unmutated IGH also, combination of ibrutinib tend to do better than patients with only chlorambucil. So chlorambucil is unmutated versus ibrutinib unmutated. The whole difference is very clear. So the 5 years PFS in unmutated with ibrutinib was 67% compared to 6% in chlorambucil. So the whole concept till now is very clear. BTK inhibitors plus or minus a CD20 antibody will make a severe difference in high-risk mutations. So these are the same Resonate trial which was used in relapse CLL, 6 years data, which still show ibrutinib and of a CD20 antibody. Probably this will not have any importance, but just to show, like as over the time, the biggest problem when people use a BTK inhibitor in a upfront CLL, we notice like for first 1 or 2 to 3 months, probably 2-3 months, there is the initial first month at least there will be an initial leukocytosis, lymphocytosis. We see patient comes up, WBC counts are going up on ibrutinib, and subsequently that's basically because of compartmental shift like CLL, the lymphocytes coming up from the nodes and spleen and liver into the peripheral blood. And subsequently, over the time, they settle. This graph actually was put forward to try to show like as the time goes on, the number of partial responses actually increase, and the progressive diseases or these things actually come down. That's the specialty of using a BTK inhibitor. So over the time, the partial response increases. Though no much important in the complete response, you can never achieve a complete response with a BTK inhibitor alone. Probably we're adding a venetoclax, which doesn't have any data right now, or CD20 antibody in the term of obinutuzumab, not rituximab. Same Resonate data, which is showing probably it's not clear in here picture. So people with ibrutinib with IGH mutation or unmutated almost tend to do same. P53 also, there's a small gap, but still it's good enough to have a thing. Other Notch and SF3 mutation, which almost is the same. On overall survival, which probably CLL, we cannot have a difference in overall survival. So Resonate study showed us the common BTK, so ibrutinib's adverse effects. So diarrhea being common, so multiple fatigue, cough, urinary tract infections, thrombocytopenia. So many patients of say 8 to 6 patients come with the petechial rashes on ibrutinib and UTI infections. And same thing, as the time goes on, the number of side effects and their adverse effects actually come down. Infections and neutropenia being still the bigger things, but as the time goes on, they come down. Other hypertension, diarrhea, all actually settle as the time goes on. So overall the time, the prevalence of grade 3 and more adverse effects actually settle as the response also as it goes on. So what are the other drugs now? We have spoken about the BTK, first generation BTK inhibitor like ibrutinib. Now coming to other drugs which actually can be used in high-risk mutation, that's one of the drugs is venetoclax, and especially in the combination of obinutuzumab. This is the only combination right now, apart from BTK inhibitor, which can be used in high-risk CLL, where there can be a intermittent treatment. In the sense, you can stop somewhere 1 year or 2 years, venetoclax, obinutuzumab of 6 cycles of obinutuzumab, 6 months, and venetoclax of 1 year or 2 years. You can stop. They don't need a lifelong treatment or continuous treatment. You can have intermittent treatment. And these are the only drugs, obinutuzumab and venetoclax, where they can have a minimal residual disease. Minimal residual disease, 8 years, 7 years back, did a major difference in treatment of CLL. But with now availability of BTK, probably the MRD has gone, minimal residual disease is going a back foot. But where we need a minimal residual, but still importance in minimal residual disease is very rarely. I think now nobody does transplants in patients with CLL who fail on chemotherapy and all, young patients, allotransplant, where MRD negativity really makes fun. There, obinutuzumab and venetoclax are only drugs which actually induce minimal residuals. And as I think graph clearly shows, venetoclax, obinutuzumab, even in IGH mutation unmutated, they tend to follow the same path compared to chlorambucil thing, and T53 mutation also. Using addition of venetoclax to obinutuzumab really made difference compared to without using it. Now, Marino is one of the trial which was venetoclax and rituximab. Again, period rituximab doesn't have any MRD effect. It's only obinutuzumab, and very clear venetoclax addition actually makes sense. Venetoclax addition to rituximab showed a big difference in OS and PFS. So this is why the importance of Marino trial actually, which actually shows that venetoclax actually induced minimal residual disease. Out of 130 patients who could be assessed who had responded in the addition of venetoclax, 83 patients, that's more than 60 to 70%, so probably 60% of the patients were actually having a minimal residual disease, undetected minimal residual disease. Of these 83 patients, 58 patients who still maintain, even after we didn't follow up venetoclax, were maintaining minimal residual disease. Only one patient actually progressed, and 21 patients who actually had a low MRD, still MRD but lower MRD, they are actually still without any PFS event. People who had actually had 4 patients who had high MRD, one of the patients progressed. So people who had already high MRD, 11 patients had progressive disease. So that means MRD really makes a sense in the overall survival and the PFS. And people who use venetoclax, this MRD, I think an MRD is almost 50 to 60%. And as venetoclax and the data is well matched, it works everywhere, venetoclax in high risk and regular mutations. And with every drug, like probably everybody knows venetoclax, you tend to have adverse side effects more compared to patient with not using venetoclax, and infections being the fatigue and infections being the most common. Now, now because the drug of interest acalabrutinib. So summarizing, the whole high risk CLL now has evolved totally away from regular immunochemotherapy. Now upfront, even it's not wrong, even a low risk mutation, a low risk patient who requires a treatment, symptomatic CLL who doesn't have high risk mutation, it's not wrong to start a BTK inhibitor or non-chemoimmunotherapy drugs, single agent ibrutinib, and ibrutinib probably ibrutinib obinutuzumab. There's no big data to compare with alone ibrutinib, but with taking obinutuzumab separately, which has MRD additions, probably should make a sense. Now coming to acalabrutinib. Acalabrutinib is second generation BTK inhibitor, and the difference is it's a highly selective BTK inhibitor. The most of the drugs, the side effects of ibrutinib are adverse effects of ibrutinib because of this multiple inhibition, TK inhibitions. But acalabrutinib tend to maintain it's very highly selective of BTK inhibitor. Does not inhibit any of the SRC family kinases, and only 1.5% of kinases are inhibited, compared to 8.9 in ibrutinib. So most of the side effects, what we see ibrutinib, atrial fibrillation, anything else, any side effects, diarrhea and all, are because of its multi-tyrokinase, family kinase inhibitors, compared to acalabrutinib, which has highly selective. This is just to explain the SARS kinase inhibition, which we don't see in acalabrutinib. The IC lesser, more the IC number, lesser is inhibition, and acalabrutinib tend to have lesser or no inhibition of SARS kinase compared to ibrutinib. Now, so going into this, so it's the main trial, the Elevate trial, which actually is a phase 3 trial, which showed using upfront acalabrutinib with or without combination of obinutuzumab versus obinutuzumab chlorambucil, which has been an entity, and stratification is basically 17p in ECOG. So most of the criteria here is more than 65 years, or patients who are less than 65 with poor performance score or lesser creatinine clearance being slightly low, and they require according to the regular CLL criteria. All the cytogenetics, age-wise, stage-wise, everything was matched in all three groups. I think we need not to go through. And as expected in the previous trial, all BTK inhibitors, because see again, chlorambucil and Gazyva arm is always inferior. There is nothing to prove here. Very clear. Addition of acalabrutinib did make a difference. And 2 years PFS was 93 in Gazyva plus acalabrutinib to 87 only acalabrutinib. 47, mere 47 patients who were using chlorambucil with Gazyva. So the median PFS was not yet reached in the both acalabrutinib arm. So this actually, and even P53 mutations, acala-obinutuzumab combination, 95% patients were having a 2-year PFS compared to 19 patients in obinutuzumab chlorambucil arm. So actually, because of Elevate trial, where you can initially see like acalabrutinib and Gazyva, the acalabrutinib single agent has been slightly inferior to acalabrutinib Gazyva, so it's always approved in combination with Gazyva as in the upfront setting, but in a relapse setting, it can be used as a single agent. Then, first part is very clear. Most of the site in any age group and age group, staging, bulking of the disease, it actually favors acalabrutinib Gazyva. Basically, a poor performance score is the only thing where both can be same. And the mutation starting from 17p everywhere, it favors again acalabrutinib and Gazyva, except in mutated, IGH mutated, where again it's almost same because IGH mutation, acalabrutinib and single agent acalabrutinib is slightly as same as Gazyva chlorambucil. Now coming to the adverse event, the grade 2, definitely when used again, Gazyva and acalabrutinib arm tend to have slightly more reactions. And this thing is some reason infusion reactions when you're using acalabrutinib Gazyva was comparatively less compared to chlorambucil Gazyva. This was one thing which still I am not able to think through why. So because the infusion reactions always related to Gazyva. Same Gazyva is used here and acalabrutinib is never used before. So infusion related reactions somehow tend to be lesser in patients with acalabrutinib and Gazyva compared to addition of when Gazyva is used with chlorambucil. UTI, so compared to acalabrutinib, UTI, anemia, rash, these are tend to be slightly more, and pneumonic patches may become more common in the acalabrutinib. So this has a lower rates of grade 3 cardiovascular events. The atrial fibrillation is almost less than grade 3 is only 4% compared to 8 to 9% in patients with ibrutinib. Even the mere 3%, that's again mere 3% in addition to Gazyva. Hypertension is again low compared to ibrutinib. And you can notice like the patients on acalabrutinib exposure are almost 27.7%, and still the lesser cardiovascular adverse effect. And the low rates of discontinuation also were seen in acalabrutinib arm compared to Gazyva and Toramacil arm. Discontinuation was dose reduction. Discontinuation most of the times maybe because of adverse events or the loss of consent. The most of the adverse events. And ASCENT trial, same Acala combined is in a relapse setting. So combining Acala versus Idelsib or Benda, both think Acala is very clear, better than, I think there's no debate in that. And 17p deletion and P53 mutation also, Acala tend to do better than Idelsib and Bendamustine. So basically, it's already proven to have a BTK inhibitors to be things. So our whole notation is where to use Acala compared to ibrutinib. The whole notation is there. Most of the arms is a relapse setting. Most of the arms, high risk mutations and stage wise, everywhere acalabrutinib tend to do better than patients using other drugs of choice. Overall survival will not change much, same thing. So atrial fibrillations are slightly higher compared to patients with ibrutinib and rituximab versus Idelsib rituximab. And hypertension as cardiovascular events tend to be higher. I think this is no point. So coming to the guidelines of CLL now with the new thing, new treatment guidelines. So first line treatment, Acala is being approved with the combination of ideally obinutuzumab plus or minus. Obinutuzumab is the upfront treatment, or ibrutinib single agent, or venetoclax with obinutuzumab. That has been a preferred agent. The chemotherapy arms have fallen back. No more recommended in the thing, or never in high risk mutation, even in a low risk mutation also. Second line, single agent Acala, ibrutinib, venetoclax, rituximab also, and probably with available combination of venetoclax, ibrutinib also should make any sense because a new trial coming into this thing, which makes actually a better deal. Concluding, so deletion 17p or P53 mutation is considered as still a highest risk in CLL criteria, international CLL criteria. Deletion 11q IGH unmutated or elevated beta 2 micron complex, it's unmutated actually, sorry. This probably typing mistake, and complex karyotype but still considered unfavorable prognostic index, and chemotherapy is not effective. Chemotherapy has minimal role in management of relapse refractory CLL. New therapies like BTK inhibitors have become a standard of treatment of choice in high-risk CLL. With now availability of two different BTK inhibitors, ibrutinib and acalabrutinib. The only difference I feel in acalabrutinib, because I have used in 2-3 patients in acalabrutinib, probably not in treatment naive. So both patients were relapse refractory. The only difference is ease of taking, being a BD dose, and I haven't seen any side effects. The usual, somehow the usual thrombocytopenia, I mean, the petechial rashes we tend to see in regular ibrutinib. The patients is very less number, so we don't usually see that very common acalabrutinib. Thank you. So probably I went too fast because most of the trials and the data was very clearly showing BTKs and all. My only intent was what high risk mutation, how we have changed and all. I'll be very happy to take questions and clarify anything else.
Thank you, Dr. Pawan Kumar.
Yeah, sure.
Are there any questions? I think they would come up in the panel discussions. Okay, so we now have a talk by Dr. Faiq Ahmed is to how do I define high-risk CLL with pathological markers. So Dr. Faiq Ahmed is a senior consultant pathologist in the Basavatarakam Indo-American Cancer Institute. He did his MD pathology in Nizam's Institute and He's a gold medalist and also got a Young Scientist Award from the AP State Conference in 2011. And I now request Dr. Fike to take over and give his talk.
Thank you, Dr. Prasad, for this lucid introduction of mine. I think once the clinician does his presentation, it becomes easier for a diagnostician to follow for the presentation. So I think I will try to share my screen now. Hope I am clear. Am I audible and the video is clear, right? Hello?
Oh, yeah. You are very clear.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, Dr. Fike.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're able to see your slides and your voice is very clear.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers, AstraZeneca, and also the Shajappa for giving me this opportunity to be there in this forum to present on CLL. And not taking much of time, I would say that I will be just taking through the journey of CLL with various staging system, and then subsequently how diagnostics plays a role in case of stratification of the CLL patients. I will just brief through all those things. As we all know that the knowledge of CLL has progressively deepened in the last 40 years. And the diagnosis of CLL is usually suspected when you have a blood count showing absolute lymphocyte count of 5 into 10 to the power of 9 per liter. And this should be present for more than 3 months of duration, as defined by the international guidelines for CLL. And the circulating peripheral blood smear, which usually shows this neoplastic leukemic cells, are characterized by mature appearance. What exactly is the mature appearance? Is presence of minimal amount of cytoplasm, a condensed chromatin, absence of nucleoli. These usually characterize the mature appearance. So when we see that these are circulating peripheral lymphocytes, we need to prove the clonality of the cells. And the clonality is usually proven by immunophenotyping, which is carried out by flow cytometry. And the important antigenic expression profile, what we see in case of CLL patients is expression of strong CD523 and a decreased or dim expression of surface immunoglobulin CD20 and CD79, which are usually dimly expressed. So there was a big harmonization in recent 2018 where they said that presence of 5, 19, 20, 23, and surface kappa lambda is more than enough for diagnosis of CLL. But again, there are certain instances where you might have to add certain markers to differentiate and come to a diagnosis of CLL, particularly in the markers which are used are CD200, CD43, CD81, a new marker called as ROR1. These are the various markers which help in arriving a diagnosis of CLL. Again, what we see that there are numerous instances where we come across a different hematological neoplasm as a lymphoproliferative disorders presenting as the leukemic presentation, where the levels of antigen expression and the intensity of the antibody expression makes a difference, and it helps in arriving a diagnosis of clonal B-cell disorder. For instance, if we see a CLL and mantle cell lymphoma, they can be overlapped. They both are CD5 positive, and they can be, overlap morphologically. But important thing, what we need to look into is that there is usually a dim expression of surface immunoglobulin and 20 in case of CLL, but in mantle cell lymphoma, what we see is the bright antigenic expression of CD20 and surface immunoglobulin. So a level of immunoglobulin expression and the antigenic intensity usually define the various blood clonal B-cell disorders. Some possible risk factors for CLL have emerged, although the underlying triggers are poorly understood. CLL, as we all know, that it is twice common in case of men than in women, with a sex ratio of 1.5 to 2. The incidence of CLL is higher in Caucasians than the other racial groups, less common in Asian populations, especially in China, Japan, than in Caucasian population. A family history of CLL or other lymphoproliferative disorders may be a risk factor. For instance, 5 to 10% of these patients with CLL report a family history of malignancy. If we look at this slide, we see that the classic, usually the stratification of this, there are various models for staging of the CLL and which take into different risk factors into account. And during last 4 to 5 decades, we have seen that it has been evolving. The classic thing has been the Ray and Binet staging, which was established in 40 years back, where they are widely used as conventional staging system in clinical practice. And this is based on the physical examination, including peripheral blood, lymph node, liver, spleen, bone marrow. However, it has to be remembered that these two staging systems fail to discriminate among the patients at an early stage, those who will experience an aggressive disease course. Subsequently, in 2007, MD Anderson Group has come up with a nomogram to predict the overall survival for CLL patients. But again, it was in 2014 and 2016 where German group and the CLL International Prognostic Group are just not the clinical features and the biochemical parameters, but also they have considered under the various molecular abnormalities to define the patients. So when it was compared with the nomogram proposed by MD Anderson Group, the CLL IPI included the cytogenetic abnormalities was confirmed to have higher prognostic value in overall survival and the time to first treatment for newly diagnosed patients. When we go for the clinical staging system, Rai and Binet still remains the first approach in case of identifying asymptomatic patients that usually require an active surveillance, as well as those with an advanced disease in simple and very an inexpensive way. So the Rai system, which is usually more often used in USA and India, it is based on evaluation of lymphocytosis, lymphoid tissue enlargement, anemia, and thrombocytopenia, and it's staged into 0 to 4. Whereas the Binet system, more often used in Europe, is based on evaluation of lymphadenopathy, anemia, and thrombocytopenia. Having said that, there is issue with the Binet and Ray system. There is inability of both staging systems to predict disease progression in early stage patients, and there has been an intense search for the various factors that could do a prediction of eternal course of early prediction of CLL. So there, the thing was that the CLL IPI prognostic index was taken into account, and the risk categories were defined into 4 types: the low risk, intermediate risk, high risk, and very high risk. As I was telling that, for early prediction in case of for the disease, in case of like early stage patients where the disease progression is rapid, CLL IPI has been used prospectively on Binet stage A and Rai stage 0 to 2 to predict the time to first treatment. If we see the probability of remaining free from therapy at 5 years in low risk is around 80 to 85%, whereas intermediate risk is 66 to 68 and high risk is around 34 to 46%. Apart from that, the staging system of Binet and Ray have limited prediction for the power for regarding the response to treatment, while CLL and IP can predict the both progression-free survival and overall survival, and can be used in varieties of chemoimmunotherapeutic approaches. So now the CLL IPI will allow more individualized management of patients with CLL in clinical practice and in trials testing the novel drugs. If we see that both the Binet and in the Ray can give a good estimate of patient prognosis, the 10-year median survival in case of Binet stage A and 0 stage in case of Rai is around 10 years or so. Whereas in case of, if you try to take the Binet stage B and Rai stage 1 and 2, it is around median survival for around 5 to 7.5 years. Whereas in case of Binet stage 3C and whereas Rai stage 3 and 4, the median survival is around 2 to 3.5 years. So now the CLL IPI, which combines the genetic, biochemical, and clinical parameters into 4 prognostic subgroups, if we see here that the 5-year survival is significantly different from the overall survival what we have been seeing. So where the Ray and Binet staging system was used, incorporation of in IPI, the various biochemical and genetic factors have really mattered a lot. The prognostic in the last 30 years, if we try to see that there is a lot of, things about the prognostic markers popping up in the CLL, and the important prognostic markers in the chronic lymphocytic leukemia, it's varied from serum markers to flow cytometry to IGHV mutation status, microRNA, chromosome aberrations, and gene mutations, which has contributed to the prognosis. So what they have done is the clinical significance of this predictive biomarker CLL has really played an important role where deletion 17p53 mutation, Notch1 mutation, CD49, IGHV mutation status, and complex karyotype and microRNAs were reported to have a predictive value to guide the clinical decisions. Of genetic factors, the prognostic groups have been categorized into 4 groups: a very high risk, intermediate risk, and low risk. The very high risk are associated with deletion 17p53 mutation and BAIRC3 mutation, whereas high risk is associated with deletion 11q PTM mutation and Notch1 mutation and SF3B1 mutation. Whereas intermediate risk is associated with trisomy 12, normal karyotype and FISH, and low risk with isolated deletion 13q. So when we come to see that mutation and the frequency in case of CLL, the mutated IGHV and deletion 13q are the most commonest ones, which account for 50 to 60%, and they carry a good prognosis. But if we take unmutated IGVH complex karyotype, deletions in 11q and Notch mutations and deletion 17p and recurrent balance translocation are usually carrying the adverse prognosis. So there are various biological factors which affect the prognosis in the patient. Chromosomal abnormalities offer further insight into disease progression and prognosis, and the prevalence is dependent on whether the patients are previously untreated or have relapsed refractory disease. Typically, what we analyze is in CLL patient is 16q, 11q deletion, to trisomy 12, 17p deletion, and 13q deletion. If we see that when the patient survival is monitored along with that of the adverse cytogenetic abnormalities, the TP53 mutations carries an adverse prognosis followed by 11q deletion, whereas trisomy 12 carries an intermediate prognosis. A patient with normal karyotype and deletion 13q does not have that bad prognosis. So how are these genetic aberrations detected in CLL? The genetic aberrations are detected by various techniques: the karyotyping, fluorescent in situ hybridization, and now the sequencing technology, which involves Sanger sequencing and next-gen sequencing. Historically, we all know that karyotyping is usually, in case of CLL, had been a very bad thing because the CLL cells are mature and you don't get good metaphases. But with recent advances with stimulation techniques, the cells goes directly into the cycle, and then you can analyze the patient with karyotyping, and it has an important bearing when the patient has a complex karyotype. I'll be coming to what exactly is meant by complex karyotype in my next slides. Subsequently, as during the course when the karyotyping was difficult, in last 20 years or so, the fluorescent in situ hybridization has become an important technique for detection of the cytogenetic abnormalities. And the 4 cytogenetic abnormalities which are commonly detected by FISH, as I was telling, 17, 13, 11, and trisomy 12 is usually detected by FISH technology. So it has become a mandatory kind of thing to have this fish with this four probes for assessing the recurrent genetic abnormalities, which is seen in case of CLL. As I was talking about how the conventional cytogenetics used to be an historic thing where you never used to get good metaphases, but now the chromosomal aberrations are usually picked in 40 to 50% of cases, and which is really good supported by means of fluorescent in situ hybridization to identify the aberration in case of 80% of cases using disease-specific process. One more thing, what we have come across now recently is another important issue of genetic risk stratification in CLL was identifying this mutation status of immunoglobulin variable heavy chain genes. As the slide shows that the cytogenetic complexity, which is something like a biological puzzle for underlying clinical aggressiveness in CLL. First, it is important to know what exactly is meant by complex karyotype. The complex karyotype is defined as karyotype having more than 3 cytogenetic abnormalities, which could be structural or numerical. But again, in CLL, in various debate about the cytogenetic abnormalities, whether to take more than 3 as complex karyotype, or the significance of more than 5 has to be taken into credence to call it as a complex karyotype. There was a larger study which was carried out, and they have studied around 6,000 patients or so, and they have seen that patients with high cytogenic complexity with more than 5 chromosomal aberrations usually carried a bad prognosis, and it was independent of whether the patient had P53 mutation or IGHV mutation at the clinical stage of the disease. So patients with more than 5 chromosomal aberrations become a bad prognostic in the presence of any of the other things. When we try to assess the patients having cytogenetic abnormalities, which are described as an intermediate and high risk, patients with usually 3 aberrations, if associated with P53 mutation, show bad prognosis. Similarly, with patients with 4 aberration and P53 shows a bad prognosis. So exactly, you have to take that more than 3 chromosomal abnormalities should not be axonomically considered to be unfavorable in case of CLL unless this patient has associated P53 mutations. So next, once you are through with your thing, that comes your P53 aberration and the prognostic value of it. Normally, if we try to see that this is P53 is usually detected by FISH as deletion of 17p, and patients with P53 mutations together with deletion should be summarized as an aberration of TP53 gene. So in 60% of patients, we see that there is where there is deletion of TP53, 60% of the patients do have mutations. But again, there are some 30% of patients where there is no deletion of 17p, but there is mutation which is seen across in TP53 gene. So it becomes important that these patients, apart from being tested for cytogenetics, need to be tested for a mutation analysis. And the mutation analysis in this patient is quite important because P53, usually the overall survival is very low in patients who are P53 positive. So how are we going to detect these patients who are having P53 mutation? As there are various technologies, FISH, Sanger sequencing, NGS, and genomic arrays, the first and foremost thing which we all are adapted is testing by FISH. But as I was telling that there will be cases where 30% of patients will have mutation but no deletion. So it is important that we resort to a technique which is either a Sanger sequencing and NGS. And it is usually the P53 sequencing should cover the exon 4 to 10 and the corresponding DNA binding domain of codons 100 to 300 and oligomerization domain at codon 3, 23 to 265 is a basic minimum requisite for testing of this P53 mutations. The Hamblin et al. And Damley et al. In 1999 separately has shown that unmuted IgH genes are associated with more aggressive course of chronic lymphocytic leukemia when compared to that of the mutated IgHV. 20 years after a landmark publication, there is a consensus that somatic hypermutation status of immunoglobulin variable gene is an important cornerstone for accurate risk stratification and therapeutic decision making in patients with CLL. The IgVH status has traditionally been determined by Sanger sequencing, but there is increasing growing demand that these patients should also be tested by NGS to give a good results. So immunoglobulin heavy chain gene, which is a powerful predictor of duration of response and overall survival with immunotherapy, can be in majority of Indian centers is usually done by Sanger sequencing, but it's being instituted that NGS technology will definitely have a good result, because in 24% of patients, you can have multiple productive clonality, which is not related to IgVH, which can be studied in patients with CLL. Now, it comes whether the challenge of unavailable IgH mutations stated in case of CLL in resource-limited settings. An issue that still needs to be considered relates to the feasibility to investigate all parameters included in CLL prognostic model in context with standard care of CLL patient. A registry with large number of patients across USA, included both academic and community centers, showed that 90% of these patients with CLL were not screened for IgHV mutation. Even that CLL IPI meta-analysis referred to earlier, 1/3 of patients lack this information. So this is, when we see this, this is indeed a matter of concern when it comes to the worldwide applicability of CLL IPI, particularly considering that unmutated IgVH status has major impact on the scoring system, because it has a score of 2, which is double than that of the clinical stage and age of the patient. So when defining the high risk in NCCN guidelines, as told by Dr. Pawan, the DNA sequencing is important in detecting the TP53 mutation, and IgVH mutational analysis is important, as when mutated P53 is unfavorable, whereas unmutated IgVH carries a bad prognosis. Coming to flow cytometry, CD38, ZAP70, and CD4090, which is a new marker, has an important role in defining the high-risk patients. Whereas interface cytogenetics using FISH technologies, the 11q and 17p are associated with unfavorable prognosis, and the complex karyotype, which indicates unfavorable prognosis, is presence of more than 3 or equal to 3 unrelated chromosomal abnormalities in more than one cell on a karyotype. Other factors which are now being seen with associated with high-risk CLL are the CD38 expression is an indicator of higher risk CLL, and it identifies unmutated IgH clone, which can be detected flow cytometry. Beta-2 microglobulin, which is associated with greater extent of disease. ZAP70 is associated with disease progression, and patients with ZAP70, it can be a predictor for Richards syndrome in case of patients with CLL. Notch1 gene mutation, which is seen in around 10 to 15% of CLL patients, again indicates a transformation to a diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, whereas SF3B1 gene mutation, which can be seen in 10 to 15% of CLL patients, has dysfunctional protein processing, and these patients are associated to have resistance to treatment with fludarabine. Not much of extensive studies are being published from India, but there is one such study which is from Chandigarh PGI, where they have studied the genomic alterations in chronic lymphocytic leukemia and their correlation with clinical hematological parameters and progression. And what they concluded was that 65% of patients with CLL has deletion 13q, which is associated with DLEU2 and DLEU1 RB1 gene deletion, which was the most common compared with the other abnormalities like deletion 11q and deletion 17p patients presenting with cytopenias and higher Binet stage, while those with deletion 13q had a longer time to first treatment. To summarize, I would say that deletion 17p, deletion 11q, that is your ATM, and unmutated IGHV status has worse prognosis. Other markers like CD38, SAP17, Notch1, and beta 2 microglobulin and SS3B1 gene mutations are also associated with high risk. CLL IPI scoring should be used clinically to determine the prognosis. And the current NCCN guidelines define mutated TP53, unmutated IGHV, deletion 17p, deletion 11q, and complex karyotype as an important prognostic markers for high-risk CLL. Thanks, one and all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Faik, for that excellent presentation. I think we'll now go on to the panel discussion, which is to be done by Dr. Karanu Kumar. Dr. Faik will ask the questions related to his talk in the panel discussion because he's also a panel member. And I now invite Dr. K. Karanu Kumar to moderate the panel discussion on the optimal selection of second generation BTK inhibitors for treating high-risk CLL. Now, Dr. Karanu Kumar is a consultant hematologist and hemato-oncologist, bone marrow transplant physician at the Yashoda Hospitals, Secunderabad. He did his MD from the Institute of Medical Sciences, Hyderabad, and the DNB in clinical hematology from Narayana Hrudayalaya, Bangalore. And while Dr. Karanu Kumar is preparing, do I introduce the panel members or will you introduce Dr. Karanu?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. Dr. Faik Ahmed,
Yes.
who just finished his talk, senior consultant pathologist from the Basavatarakam Cancer Institute. Dr. B. Chandrasekhar, senior consultant hematologist, Mahatma Gandhi Cancer Hospital and Research Institute, Visakhapatnam. Dr. K.K. Radhika, assistant professor and consultant hematologist, Nizam's Institute, Hyderabad. Dr. Stalin Bala, assistant professor and consultant medical oncologist, Nizam's Institute of Medical Sciences, Hyderabad. And Dr. K. Sanat, consultant medical oncologist, Basavatarakam Indo-American Cancer Institute, Hyderabad. Welcome all the panelists, and I invite Dr. K. Karanu Kumar to go ahead with his panel discussion moderation.
Yeah, just a minute. I'll be joining. I have some problem here accessing the file. Yeah, okay. Okay. So I'm really honored to moderate the panel discussion over here with the respected panelists. I hope all of the invited panelists are here. Dr. Chandrasekhar, Dr. Faik, Dr. Radhika, Dr. Sanat, Dr. Stalin. Okay, so already we are running out of time. Start the session. So I have some clinical scenarios here given to me. I'll be discussing case by case. I would like to ask Dr. Chandrasekhar the first case. It is a 70-year-old male diagnosed case of CLL, mild anemia and TLC of 46,000 and mild thrombocytopenia. Generalized lymphadenopathy and further evaluation is a comorbidities of he had a cardiac disease and hypertension and hyperlipidemia. Cytogenetic evaluation showed trisomy 12. He was started on chemoimmunotherapy. So 1 year later, he had meaningful response and improved clinical improvement. But somehow he has visited other hematologists and somehow he got for again FISH again and it shows 17p deletion. The first question is how will you manage the patient now? So patient with the overall meaningful response and is asymptomatic now and the FISH shows 17p deletion.
Hi, Karan.
Hi.
Yeah.
Please go on.
Thank you, Dr. Prasad, giving me this opportunity. Karan, I think he has and he is absolutely, he's responded well now.
Yeah, he has a good response. Yeah, he's clinically
He
meaningful.
responded well. And anyway, he is recently, after 1 year, he has detected to have deletion 17. But according to guidelines, and it is clear that when there is no indication for treatment, when there is no active disease, I don't think so he requires treatment as of now. I don't know. I think we have to evaluate his routine parameters, all those CBCs and remaining.
You want to treat only for symptomatic, right?
Pardon?
No. You want to treat if he becomes symptom, if he develops symptoms.
Yeah, if he develops symptoms, if he develops active disease, we need to treat him. But as he is having history of CABZ and hypertension, he must have an antiplatelets and hypertension, chances of bleeding are there.
So do you want to closely monitor this patient and
brutally be difficult in. I didn't get you.
Yeah, please complete 10 seconds. And once you complete, then I'll ask.
Yeah. So initially, I'll monitor this case, and if he requires treatment, maybe if I have and if I have patient fit, I'll go with Acalabru.
Super. So I'll also do the same. I'll monitor this patient closely. Once he start developing symptoms or any signs of active disease, then we'll go ahead with the treatment.
Yes,
And,
yes.
Cytogenetic change per se, there is no indication for treatment. Okay. The second question. So will you start, suppose say this patient has symptoms.
Yeah.
So what therapy will you choose? Will you start BTK immediately?
Yeah, if he develops symptoms, I think as he received chemoimmunotherapy and it is more than 1 year, and he is having a 17p deletion. So he requires BTK inhibitors, and we need to select the BTK which is better for his present situation. And another option would be venetoclax based. We need to find out finances here at my center. As I am working in a center where we mostly depends on the government schemes. So theoretically, Acalabru and or venetoclax based therapies would be better in this case, as he is on antiplatelets. He must have an antiplatelet, CABZ and hypertension.
So you are worried about cardiac side effects, right?
Yes.
So you already told that in case asymptomatic, we're going to just wait and watch. Okay, I'll complete the case here.
Yes.
So these are the international working group CLL guidelines when to initiate treatment. So we all agree that so when the patient has symptoms or active disease, we usually think of treatment irrespective of the cytogenetic aberration or the changes for the patient. So this is the chart showing the ESMO guidelines. Again, here the algorithm starts with the patient if he is symptomatic, and based on the genetic mutation, we go ahead. So because of short of time, I will not be taking much discussion here. We'll go to second case. This question is to Dr. Faiq Ahmed, senior consultant pathologist.
Yeah.
Sir has clearly, very beautifully explained about the genetics part in these slides. Just to brush out, this is the case, sir. 74-year-old male, 74-year-old patient presents with cervical lymphadenopathy with comorbidities like mentioned here, extensive bulky nodes. He has mild thrombocytopenia, otherwise mild anemia. In case of CLL, and the bulky nodes 12 centimeter, and FISH testing reveals deletion 11q, and IGHV is unmutated. But to you, this is just a case scenario, and sir, this is out of your practice. The first question is, sir, how commonly do you get to see IGV IGHV test being recommended by hematologists or oncologists?
I would say that that practice is still not there. Very occasionally we have been asked for this IGVHT test, but it is not that frequent.
Agree, sir. So even in my center and in my practice, I routinely do cytogenetics and fish. Usually we stop at the level of IGHV because of the finances and the turnaround time and so many other things. And second question, sir, would you perform panel of tests together or would you employ a sequence to the testing pattern to identify the patient early? I agree that the test you perform will be decided by the physician who is asking the test. Otherwise, how is it in your center? Are you doing the panel of tests together or are you doing running a reflex panel sort of
Yeah.
thing?
Actually, upfront, we have a panel for any patient who has been diagnosed with CLL. Once we are through and confirmed by phenotyping that we are dealing with CLL, we have a panel which is called as a CLL comprehensive panel, where we do the FISH testing and subsequently the cytogenetic analysis is carried out in these patients. And mutation analysis, as I was telling, that it's very rare. But otherwise, upfront, in majority of the cases who are paying kind, because once you have a financial constraint, these tests become quite cumbersome for patients. So once they are sure that this patient is having CLL, definitely we have this sequence of events where we first get a panel of FISH done and then cytogenetic analysis being carried out.
Yeah, agree, sir. The financial limitation is a major concern where we hesitate to order the test. Yeah, agree. Do you see merit in performing IGHV through, is there any difference, sir, Sanger sequencing or the NGS?
Yeah,
Already you have explained in your slides.
exactly.
Can you brief it?
Yeah, what happens usually, the limit of detection plays an important role in case of detecting this IGVH mutation analysis. Around 10 to 20% of mutant alleles which are there can be missed by means of Sanger sequencing. So it is important that, if we move ahead to doing by NGS, it will be a better platform. But if it is not there, I think IGH can be carried out by means of Sanger sequencing.
Yeah, agree, sir. Thank you. Thanks for the information. So we'll go ahead with the next scenario. I need not go through all this because it's already covered. This is scenario 3. This case goes to Dr. Radhika. She's the consultant hematologist in NIMS. Dr. Radhika, this is your case. The 54-year-old male, known case of B-cell ALL, very active person. No cytopenias, lipandopathy, beta-2 microglobulin is mildly elevated. Bone marrow, 80% lymphocytes. IGHV mutated, but has deletion 17p4. So this is the scenario, asymptomatic CLL patient with 17p deletion.
Thank you, Dr. Karun. Thank you, organizers. So this is
How will you manage?
Yeah, so this is a 54 years old man.
Dr. Radhika, your voice is not audible, not clear.
Is it clear now?
Yeah, now better.
It's good? Okay, sure. So this is a 44 years old man, active, great going patient. Based on the information you have provided, he fits into an asymptomatic early stage disease, right? Yes. As far as CLL IPS score is considered, he gets a score of 5. His T53 mutation scores him 4. His IGHV mutated 0 score. Beta-2 microglobulin less than 3.50. RI1 BNET scores him 1 point. Age less than 65 years scores him 0. So overall, the IPS CLL score is around 5. That fits him into a high-risk CLL. So the treatment would be treat unless the patient is asymptomatic. So generally, patients with asymptomatic CLL, we use wait and watch policy. So the same applies for this patient too. The test results, whatever the T53 IGHV mutation, wouldn't change any kind of treatment strategies here. The rationale for obtaining all these prognostic markers would be for prognostic value, but otherwise it would not change any kind of treatment strategies here. So I would like to follow a wait and watch policy for this patient. I would like to get the baseline xenomics P53 and IGHV mutation here because that will help me in giving an information to the patient about the future likelihood of the future progression of the disease. And also it would give me some information about what could be the likely treatment strategies if the patient progresses on this disease. So that is why I would like to go ahead with all these prognostic markers at presentation, but it would not in any way change my treatment strategies. The treatment is going to be wait and watch policy for an asymptomatic early stage CLL.
This is a repetition. So basically, we are going to treat active and symptomatic patient or patient with an active disease, irrespective of the cytogenetic.
Yeah.
Agree. So this is a table showing the similar decision-making process. So where basically we consider treatment in a patient who has an active disease or we can see a high stage 3, 4 high risk disease, and so depending, we take decision based on the mutation status and the fitness. So combining these, we decide choice of therapy in this case. Okay, this is case scenario 4. This is for Dr. Stalin Chaudhary Bala, medical oncologist named Hyderabad. Dr. Stalin.
Yeah, good evening. Good evening.
Hi. This is your case, 74-year-old female, known case of BCL deletion 11q, IGHV status unknown. She has received 3 cycles of bendamustine rituximab, discontinued due to toxicity. She had developed severe nausea and diarrhea. She couldn't continue treatment. Stop treatment in between. And presents to clinic again after 3 months with complaints of these symptoms: night sweats, fever, weight loss. On further evaluation, she has cytopenia, she has anemia, she has thrombocytopenia, and TLC count of 55, and diabetic since 20. So here, the question to you is, Dr. Bala, what additional diagnostic test will you recommend in this scenario? So we have here IGHV, we don't know IGHV status, otherwise we have FISH showing deletion 11q, and we have hemogram here.
Yeah, I will repeat the entire CLL panel again, especially the 17P, because we had some data that even though 17P is not present at diagnosis, it can be acquired at relapse or acquired during the process of the disease progression. So I will repeat it. And the IGHV status, it is initially unknown, and I will do the IGHV status now. So coming to other investigations, she had a bicytopenia, and possibly I'm thinking that it could be because of CLL. But before starting the treatment, I will exclude that it is not autoimmune related, which can happen in a case of CLL.
So will you rechallenge this patient?
No, definitely no. For a 74-year-old female, so who suffered a lot with the previous chemotherapy, who were able to tolerate only 3 cycles of bendamustine rituximab, definitely I am not going to rechallenge her with the chemoimmunotherapy. And if I consider the BTK inhibitor, definitely I will go with acalabrutinib in this case, because she had a profuse diarrhea with the previous chemotherapy. And we know from the data that the acalabrutinib is well tolerated and had a less incidence of diarrhea compared to the ibrutinib. And also the platelet count is somewhat worrisome here, that she had a thrombocytopenia. We know that the thrombocytopenia is much more common, and decreased platelet counts are more commonly seen with ibrutinib compared to the acalabrutinib. Taking her age into account, presentation with the thrombocytopenia, previous diarrhea history, a BTK inhibitor is the choice of them. I preferably choose acalabrutinib in her.
Fair, agreed. So this is next case scenario. This is for Dr. Sanath, medical oncologist, Basatarakam. So Dr. Sanath.
Hello, hi.
Hi, Dr. Sanath. This is 30-year-old young CLL, case of young CLL. Experiences a very rapid elevation in peripheral blood leukocyte numbers, which increased from 20,000 at baseline to 2 lakh within his first year. Spleen is very large and palpable, occupying the massive spleen. So he has no notable lymphadenopathy. This patient's prognostic markers indicate an unfavorable prognosis. He has unmutated IGHV as well as trisomy 12, and he does not have deletion 17. So young CLL patient, rapidly progressing disease, and an unfavorable genotype. So how will you manage this?
So he is young, fit, and he is symptomatic because of a large splenomegaly, and he has unfavorable risk because of IGHV unmutated. So I will discuss the options of acalabrutinib plus obinutuzumab or acalabrutinib. If he is not, if the affordability is issue, then ibrutinib. Single agent ibrutinib.
Yeah, fair. So finances decides the management here between acalabrutinib and ibrutinib. Would you consider finite treatment or treatment till progression?
So this I will discuss with the patient. So this I will discuss with the patient. Another option we can give, if he wants finite treatment, then we can go with the venetoclax and obinutuzumab regimen. So in which 12 months treatment is enough. So I will discuss with them. But the problem with venetoclax and omalizumab is it's toxicity. So it is somewhat toxic region. So I will discuss with the patient and then I will.
So you will consider a finite treatment if he agrees and the finances are okay.
But mostly I will go with if he asks that, if he decides if he go with my decision, then I will go treatment till progression, because we think that CLL is a incurable disease. So if he gives option to me, mostly I will go with treatment till progression.
Okay. So if you have an option of chemoimmunotherapy and BTK inhibitors or BCL2, what would be your choice? And I think you have already answered this question. Your choice would be venetoclax and obinutuzumab. Second is BTK, right?
Yes. And because with BCL2 and obinutuzumab, the MRD we will achieve MRD at a high more.
MRD negative is possible with venetoclax.
So, though the side effects are high, so I will discuss with the patient and I will go.
So, do you consider stem cell transplant for this patient?
No. At this point, no.
So how do you plan therapy in these patients? Usually chemoimmunotherapy versus targeted therapies. Usually targeted therapies, the purpose is to keep the disease in control, and these are usually continued for lifetime, for longer time. Whereas chemoimmunotherapy, the goal of therapy is eradication, like FCR and VR therapies, and depends. We decide on multiple features like fitness and genetic profile into consideration before we decide therapy. So this is a flow chart I have taken from one of the Blood article 2018 by John Griffin. Here there are few factors which favors allotransplant in people, especially if you look at the age, the younger age and no comorbidity and well-matched donor is one of the criteria. And higher disease risk, complex karyotype, high-risk cytogenetics, MRD positivity, shorter duration of response, digital transformation, refractory to chemoimmunotherapy, refractory to BTK inhibitors or novel therapies. So these are the patients where we consider transplant. Suppose as Dr. Sanath mentioned, stem cell transplant is not an option at this point. So suppose the patient becomes refractory to therapy later, definitely this is an option. So do you have time? So this is the last case. I'll close with this case. This is a 72-year-old a man with active lifestyle, diagnosed BCLL stage 1, minimal palpable adenopathy. 5 years after his diagnosis, he developed bulky adenopathy, progressive larger lymph nodes, the cervical and axillary area, no clinically palpable spleen, TLC of 45,000, deletion 11q in fish, 6 cycles of VR he was received. Treatment stopped when all of the clinically visible diseases had disappeared. He received a finite treatment. He tolerated well. The blood deposits were reduced between 800 to 1000 by 4 months after the last VR cycle. And his HP and platelet normalized. So now almost 8 years he was doing fine. Now he's become 80-year-old. He started to exhibit signs of bulky adenoma. So again, there is a growth in lymph nodes. So at this point, this question is for Dr. Chandrasekhar. Prognostic markers you will prefer in relapsed refractory patients. So here, we have fish showing deletion 11q. Other than that, we don't have any other information. So what are the other?
Yes, according to as Dr. Stalin said, CLL patients can acquire the mutations at relapse when they are progressing. So I repeat the fish again to look for any 17q deletions are there or not, if possible TP53. And I don't think so IgH mutation they have done here. These are for completion sake. We should repeat the prognostic markers
Yeah,
again.
you will repeat fish and you will also ask for IgHV status, right?
Mostly finances are okay.
Yeah. Agree. So, Dr. Radhika, which regimen do you most often use in patients with relapsed refractory CLL?
Yeah, sure. In continuity with Dr. Chandrasekhar, I would get fish for prognostication. So because if he turns out to be a high risk genomic, high risk CLL, or if his P53 is positive, then obviously I would like to go for the latest targeted therapies like BTKI inhibitors. Either the first generation or second generation acalabrutinib is my treatment of choice. Patient financially good, venetoclax plus minus obituzumab, whatever the drug, whatever has been referred in the previous by this previous speakers can be considered here. So the regimens to be considered are BTK inhibitors, ibrutinib, acalabrutinib, or BCL2 inhibitors like or venetoclax, plus minus an anti-CD20 is the preferred regimen of choice. But because the patient has relapsed more than 3 years after attaining a response to the previous,
8 years.
no, after chemoimmunotherapy, it's 3 years, I suppose, right? From asymptomatic, after 5 years, he became symptomatic. From symptomatic, he relapsed after 3 years. So if the genomic profile shows a low risk CLL, maybe you can also re-challenge the patient with a repeat chemoimmunotherapy too. That's obviously the second option, not the primary option.
Agree with you. So the regimen which we choose basically depends on the type of therapy what the patient has received earlier and the duration of the relapse when it happened after the response and the mutation. So these are the three things which we take into account when we decide on therapy. So Dr. Stalin, what factor influences your choice of therapy? Again, I think we are repeating the same thing.
Yeah, the same thing. If at all the prognostic markers are present, they can influence the therapy now. And of all major thing is because she is a 72-year-old female, the tolerability to the previous chemotherapy and also her performance status at this relapse will decide the therapy. But whatever it is, the most probably at this age with a relapsed CLL, the most effective therapy is an oral therapy, that is either ibrutinib or acalabrutinib, taking her past history into consideration and her age. So possibly a BTK inhibitor is the treatment of choice for her.
Yeah. I think age-wise, yeah, BTK would be better choice. Agree. Dr. Sanath, what is your treatment goal in elderly frail patients with CLL? Again, I think more or less same question.
Good palliation of symptoms mainly.
Okay. So what do you use in these patients?
So same, it depends upon fish. It depends upon repeating the cytogenetics. So if there is same, if there are high risk, then depend mostly I will go with acalabrutinib after discussing. If they are for low risk and low risk, then I will try to use single agent rituximab or bendamustine rituximab.
Agree. We'll go with the patient's performance status and financial. And then finally, we also discuss with the patients finally, and we also should respect what they want overall perspective. So here ends the discussion, and thank you each and every panelist for participating. And thanks for the organizers for honoring me by moderating this session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Karun Kumar, and thanks all the panelists for the nice discussion. We come to the end of the session, and some of the take-home points are that we should always do risk stratification and find out who fall into the high-risk category, because those are the ones who very soon would be needing treatment, if not right on the time of diagnosis. Second point is that mostly these patients being elderly, they need to be looked at the quality of life context and see how best we can give them a meaningful life. And in that sense, the BTK inhibitors definitely play a role. As most panelists have also said that chemoimmunotherapy may not be a well-tolerated treatment in that age groups. And there come the BTK inhibitors. Well, of course, ibrutinib, most of us are very familiar, especially with the generic versions being available. But acalabrutinib, with its lesser side effect profile and more safety vis-a-vis the platelet count and things like that, is definitely a good choice. But of course, all other things should permit usage in the patient. So these are the points that I took from today's meeting. And I hope all of you enjoyed the meeting, and I hand over the proceedings to the organizers to take it forward. Thank you.